This week you'll be writing an essay that requires analysis to analyze a story of your choice based on an article of your choice. That can sound a little confusing or overwhelming if you're not really sure what analysis is. So in this lecture we're going to talk about exactly what is expected in an analysis. To make it easy to understand, we're going to refer to the steps toward analysis as stair steps. Notice that with each step, you're rising to a higher plane of thinking, and also that with each step, you have a deeper thought. So with each step, the thoughts that are involved should become deeper or more critical. Anytime we read a story or watch a movie, the first thing that we're taught to do is summarize it. In elementary school, that's the first thing we learn, is that when we hear a story we can repeat some or all, or basically condense it into a few of our own words to capture all of the main meaning. We can condense a full 2-hour movie into about a minute of summary when we tell it to someone else, or we could summarize it in several minutes or go really into detail. But regardless, summary is when you condense the material into those main key points. And that's the first step toward doing anything else. You have to basically understand it enough to be able to summarize it. The next step is response. You may have actually been assigned to write a response essay at some point. Some teachers love those. Response is basically how you feel or what you think as you're reading a story or watching a movie. Maybe it made you cry or laugh, or it was inspiring. All of those are emotional responses that come from something. Maybe it's because you related to something. Maybe it reminded you of a grandparent. Maybe it reminded you of your own goals. But it was tied very much to you and who you are, and the things that you thought about and the things that you felt affected whether or not you liked the story or not. So beyond just being able to summarize it, we also have to recognize our personal response. The third step is interpretation. Now, interpretation and analysis are sometimes interchangeable words. We're going to look at this as a third step on the way to analysis, analysis being the fourth. So interpretation here refers to adding meaning specifically by looking at a certain angle. So in other words, we're not going to look at the story as a whole. We're going to pick out one part of it. So something that's symbolic, or a metaphor, or the setting adds meaning, or a relationship adds meaning, or a certain character's personality or specific flaws in a particular character. We look as narrowly as possible at something that we can add meaning to. So we interpret on a really small level, as small as we can go, to add some meaning. And now we're to analysis. Analysis is described by some as breaking something apart and then figuring out how it fits back together. If you remember, we've already had one lesson on analysis where I talked about how it's all about asking questions and harder questions and harder questions, and then thinking of some possible answers. Well, now, expanding a little bit more on analysis, consider the breaking it apart and putting it back together. That's basically when you break it apart, you interpret each part. So you look at those little pieces as little pieces, but you don't want to stop there. You don't just want to say, well, this piece means this, and get so carried away with that little part that you never put it back into the big picture. With analysis, you do put the little part back in, but you recognize how that little part adds meaning to the whole. So now that we understand this one part based on this angle that we were looking at, now we understand the piece as a whole completely different. Let's practice. Some of you may have heard this story before. He noticed a young man ahead of him picking up starfish and flinging them into the sea. Finally catching up with the youth, he asked him why he was doing this. The answer was that the stranded starfish would die if left until the morning sun. But the beach goes on for miles and miles, and there are millions of starfish, counted the other. How can your effort make any difference? The young man looked at the starfish in his hand and threw it to safety in the waves. "It makes a difference to this one," he said. All right, to summarize that, there was a boy throwing starfish into the water. An old man thought that was ridiculous. There was too many to make a difference. And he pointed out that although he can't save them all, he could at least save that one, or however many he had. I chose this story because it is easy to get a response. Of course, also because it's short and would fit into the presentation, but because it makes you think of things and it makes you feel things. It's kind of an inspiring story, right? How did you feel? Think about your response, because your response is different than mine. It's different from anyone else who reads or watches or listens to it. It might be similar and you might use the same words, but really it's different because you apply your personal experience. So what is your personal experience? Why did you feel the way you felt? Why did you think the things you thought? Is this story really just about starfish? Does it make you just want to run out to the beach and save the starfish? Maybe you felt inspired. Is that what you were inspired to do? Probably not. Probably your response had to do with your interpretation. You immediately understood that there were metaphors working here, that this wasn't just a boy with starfish, but there's some deeper meaning. The starfish. Let's look at just the role of the starfish. Who are those starfish? Maybe if you want to be a teacher, it's your students or your future students. If you're a parent, maybe it's your children. If you have a responsibility at church with the youth, maybe it's the youth, or with the children, maybe it's the children there. If you have nieces or nephews or other family members, maybe it's them. Maybe it's just the people that you pass by at Walmart or on the street. Who are those starfish? Because they're not really starfish, are they? Now we could look at others too. Who is the little boy? Who is the old man? Who would criticize you or tell you that you couldn't make a difference? That's the old man. What is the water? What is this little kid throwing them into? That can get a little bit deep if you really think about it. How is he saving them? What's he giving them that can save some, but he won't have enough time to save others? What's the sun represent? Just some things to think about. You can look at any little part. Okay, so now it's time to analyze. Now remember, analyze, we ask questions, we come up with possible answers, we figure out why something might matter. We're trying to figure out how this part fits in with the whole. Okay, so we started out with these starfish. These starfish aren't just starfish. Let's say they're students. A teacher has all these students, and she just can't reach all of them completely, at least to the degree she wants, but she can at least reach a few, and even the one is important enough that she would still put her effort into that. Why? Why is that one student so important? Why does that affect all of the rest of the story? Why does that affect the old man? Did the old man figure out that this one starfish or this one student was worth all the effort of running and even the disappointment of not being able to save them all, but recognizing that one is that important that we would put everything into it? So this one is important to the whole. And maybe it's more than that. Maybe because we can reach the one, that one can go and reach others, which will reach others, and that one bit of effort will continue because it will encourage others to make the same effort. So it's fitting back into the story. It's fitting back in by how it matters. I'm not just looking at the starfish, but why it mattered to the kid, why it mattered to the old man, why the starfish is important even to the ocean. Why is the starfish not important only by itself, but important to the rest of the story? All right, now switching to a new example. Humpty Dumpty. I love Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Okay, so what happened? Humpty sat on a wall, he fell down, nobody could fix him. Now you all may respond to this completely different. Some of you responded by thinking, why in the world is she reading me a nursery rhyme? What does this have to do with my essay? Some of you responded by imagining when you were a little kid. Some of you might have thought of your grandparents or a nursery rhyme book that you read this in. A lot of you probably responded with mental images of an egg. Never says it's an egg, by the way. Maybe you were thinking of some other things associated with Humpty. Maybe it was from your kindergarten class or whatever thoughts or feelings you had while you heard Humpty Dumpty. That was your response. Emotional or mental response. All right, to interpret, let's look at some parts and ask some questions. And what is Humpty Dumpty? Is he an egg? Why is he an egg? Never says he's an egg. He is not an egg. So what else could he be? Or what's the king's men? Or what are the horses? Or what's the wall? Now, let's say just focus on Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty could be a divorce, a marriage that falls apart and can't be put back together. Could be an alcoholic's life, just can't be put back together. You know, I had a great class last semester that came up with the Casey Anthony trial and how the Casey Anthony trial is Humpty Dumpty. Now, we're not going to go too far into it because that would go into analysis, but think about this. What is Humpty Dumpty? Let's interpret. Let's add some meaning to a part. Look at one angle, one aspect, not the whole thing yet, just one thing at a time. You know, let's go with the Casey Anthony trial for the sake of analysis in this. Let's say that Humpty Dumpty is a metaphor for the Casey Anthony trial. How does that all fit together? Well, consider that the reason that she was found not guilty was because they had so many puzzle pieces to the crime, and yet they just couldn't make it fit together. They were missing too many pieces. So the analysis aspect, where you break it apart and you put it back together, they broke it apart. They couldn't put it back together, just like Humpty Dumpty. They had all the pieces, but all the prosecution, all the defense, all the jury, everybody involved, nobody could quite put the crime scene together, and so it lost, because it was Humpty Dumpty. Alright, so some things to keep in mind for this essay, that you are writing an analysis. You're not writing a summary. Maybe some summary will be used to set some context for some evidence to make your point, but the essay should not have a whole lot of summary. That's back in elementary school. It really should not have your response either. You need to recognize your response, but only because it's just one of the stair steps to get to analysis. But this essay is not a response essay. Interpretation, however, now we're getting close enough that we can start putting that in. So this essay, you're going to use interpretation and analysis. And yes, you'll go on up the scale of Bloom's taxonomy and stick in some synthesis and evaluation also. But focus on analysis and what analysis is. Remember that the topic for this essay is the story. Peter Pan, Pinocchio, The Lion King, whatever you pick, it's the story that you're focusing on. In that story, you're going to use the article to support the argument that you're making about it. So you're going to analyze it from the perspective of, let me give you a quick example, I'm almost out of time, but Pinocchio. Pinocchio uses a lot of magic. His nose grows. He's a puppet. He can't really talk and walk. He can't really become a real boy, but he does. Does this really speak to the children because it's what they really care about? Is it a success or not? And is it a success because of the things that are talked about in A Child's Need for Magic, or something completely different? So judge it based on the article. Is it a success or not? If you do The Good Soldier, remember how well is stereo